Once again, I'm Michael Anino, and it's now my pleasure to introduce to you Craig Kilby. And this is not the same Craig Kilby that you've seen making posts on RootsWeb. This is a different Craig Kilby. It's his alter ego, anyway, okay? Craig is a phenomenal genealogist, a phenomenal researcher. I have firsthand seen the product of his efforts, and it really is amazing. And he's very much a perfectionist, and so sometimes if you see, well, that guy's a bit of a curmudgeon, it's because he has a very strict notion of what things should be like and how they should be done. And when it comes to genealogy, that's exactly what you want in someone doing research and genealogical research. You don't want someone who's willing to just guess at this and, well, this will be okay. You want someone who is very much going to the facts, recognizing what are facts and what are not. And therefore, I am convinced that you will greatly enjoy this presentation on the ins and outs of Courthouse Research. Mr. Kilby.
Thank you. I'm really not a bad guy. I hope you all left your eggs at home. This topic's about researching at courthouses, and each state has its own separate, maybe different way of doing things, and within each state, each county has its own different way of doing things. But the general theme is the same throughout, and we're going to talk about part one is what is the clerk's office, and part two is how do you use it. I have a favorite. Madison County clerk told me once, not long ago, something about genealogists. I said, she goes, we just shudder when people walk in the door with I heart cemeteries on their t-shirts. Because usually they're in a group and they're, well, here's the deal. The clerk's office is a modern day office, and its duties are not to be a genealogy research lab. They take care of deeds, they take care of wills, marriages, and the ongoing court docket at the court, the real court. So they're very busy people with real life things to do. The people that are typically using the records room are going to be attorneys, title companies, surveyors, real estate agents and appraisers, and professional genealogists, and of course the general public, like would be you. And you have to keep in mind, other people are trying to do business. It's not a place to be real loud and noisy. Don't have your cell phones with you, and hopefully you know what you're doing when you get in there. A lot of people are scared to even go in a records room because they're intimidated by just the sheer number of books on the shelf and where do I even start. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Don't ever be afraid to ask for help from the staff, because that's their job, is to help you. But they can't be with you all day long. They'll just guide you in the right direction. A lot of people, I've seen this, a lot of people do this, and I know there's a mixed levels of experience in the audience today, but I'll try to start it as simple as I can. Let's say, for example, you're going to start with wills. Which will book do you look for? You don't look for the book first, you look at the index. These wills are indexed in an index book. A lot of people don't realize the deeds are the same way. You want to find the index to the name, and that will tell you what book and page to find that record in, you hope. There are two kinds of indexes. I don't have a PowerPoint, I haven't joined the modern age yet. This is Madison County, and this is the one you sure hope the county you're working in is using. It's all already alphabetized by, here's surname M, and then surnames under that category, M.A., page 54, M.E., page 55. So you just go straight to that page in the index book, and you'll be right where you want to be. Then on that page is each and every individual entry for that name, and then first name, and then the book and page, and oftentimes even the date. So it's quite helpful. They've done your work for you. You love these. It's called a COTS index. They're wonderful. Unfortunately, not every county uses those. The ones that I end up always having to deal with are a little more complicated. And I had to draw a picture for you over here, and I hope, am I still connected? I hope you can see me. Let me get back here.
This is early PowerPoint.
This is prehistoric PowerPoint. Let's pretend this is a book, an index book and you've opened it up, and it's tabbed A, B, C, D, and on down the alphabet. This is the surname of the first letter of the last name. So let's say we're on the A pages. Then it has A, B, C, D, E, F, all the way down to Z. And why they go in this order, I don't know. This is at first name Andrew Avery. B, Benjamin Avery. Charles A. Anyone with the surname that ends in A and a first name that begins with C, that's how they're organized in the index. So you have to go through all of these to find, if you're looking for everybody with one surname, you have to go through every letter of the alphabet to get to it. Now, why would you rather do this in the courthouse than use microfilm? I'll tell you why. On microfilm, you can't see this. So you don't know which letter of the alphabet you're working with. Fortunately, though, if that happens to you, it's still in alphabetical order once you get into the index book. So the first page would be Andrew Avery, Andrew Allen, Andrew whatever. The next set would be the B's. Sometimes, and the Orange County is another example, they use that system, but I'm going to have to overdraft here. They have it organized by each deed book. Deed book A, Andrew Allen. Deed book B, Andrew. So you have to go to each and every deed book within the index, but it's the only way to get to where you're going. So that's the main thing, that if you didn't know about indexes, that's the first thing you're going to do when you get to a courthouse. Marriages will be indexed in a number of ways, grooms and brides and things like that. Wills, same system, except with will. All right, let's talk about deeds first. A lot of people get scared of deeds because they don't really understand land records. Don't be afraid of them. They're your best friend. The indexes are usually in two sets, the grantor and grantee. Grantor is the seller, the grantee is the buyer. They're organized by one set in one way and one way the other. So if you're looking for, you have to check both sets of records. You want to find out a grantee to find out when they first showed up in a county, for example, or when they made their first land purchase. And grantors, for the same reason, when did they last show up in the county? Did they go somewhere else? Sometimes these two indexes are combined into one called a general index, which is fine, because then you don't have to go through two sets of books, you only have to go through one. Those are the ones you want. With wills and estates, I'll give Lancaster County, Virginia as an example. Up until 1791, they filed all the wills and accounts and inventories and anything to do with that estate in the will book. After that year, for whatever reason, they only filed wills in the will books. The other papers were all filed in another set of books called estate books, which a lot of people didn't realize were there. We just are finishing up a very large grant project whereby we are abstracting all the estate records from 1835 to 1865. The purpose of this was to mainly identify the slave records. But while we were at it, we just did everything for any reason whatsoever. We've decided, we learned, actually I can tell you exactly how many people died in that period that left a will. 37.5% of the people who died actually had died with the will. That means the rest did not have a will, and if you were only looking for wills, you would never have found these records. So Barbara alluded to this set of papers in her talk, but this is very important. When she was talking about the inventories and estates and accounts, you'll find more information there, sometimes way more than you will ever find in a will. Paid $5 for the coffin, paid $12.30 for new clothes for Sally, and things like that. And this stuff you would never even know was, it'll give you all kinds of clues, is what I'm trying to say. Don't overlook those records. And when I'm at a courthouse, I don't sit there and read them while I'm there. I just copy them because I know I'm going to read them later in more detail. Usually that night when I get back to the hotel, I'm usually doing this from the road. And then I just have all kinds of new questions when I go back the next day to the courthouse. And I don't know how much time many of you usually spend out on your research trips, but that's my philosophy. And I don't try to be cheap on spending money on copies because it's always, without fail, the one thing I needed the most, I didn't copy it. Or I made the wrong abstract and left out one name that I knew had been in there. So just copy it, and you're sure to know when you get home that you've got it all with you, and you don't have to go back and do, yes?
How come they won't let us take digital images
The question was, how come you can't use?
Count.
It depends on which courthouse you're in. Some will.
Okay, because that does less damage than the copy machine.
They just don't want to lose that 50 cents.
Oh.
I'm saying the digital copies are much better because you can zoom in.
If you have a good camera, yeah. I know some. I tried this before, and I just get confused when I get home what I did. So, and I don't have the best digital camera in the world anyway. I save that for tombstones. But yeah, at least in Virginia, the copies are 50 cents a page by law, state law, and I think all that money goes to a state fund for preservation of records. I've been told that. Some counties in Virginia, anyway, they will not let you make copies from the index pages. City of Richmond won't let you do that. My county won't. I don't know why. That doesn't make, because I guess that's the most important books they have. I guess I don't want them getting out of order. But some counties don't care what you're doing. There's one county, I won't even name this county. They have a 2-volume set of will books. These are the original wills, mind you, not recorded copies, from 1660s, taped on pages within the book. And you can walk right up to the copy machine and plunk this thing down and copy it. It's terrifying. Not that I haven't done it, but he was talking about condition of some records that he was working with, and the book he opened, the pages were just falling out of it. Just have to be very careful, is all I can say. And don't be surprised when you find something that's just been cut out with a razor. Or the very one chancery suit, this was not long ago, this was in Culpeper. I was working on the Fouché family. And I was again going through the account of that estate. What money, the account is what they spent money for and where they got money in and how they spent it out during the time the estate was still open. And there was reference to a chancery suit called Fouché versus Fouché. Well, after much tracking down, and I did need help from the clerk herself. They'd actually been going through those old files and indexing them. But there certainly was a suit, but someone had taken it. It's gone. So sometimes that just happens. But so please don't steal things from the courthouse, because somebody may need it later after you think no one else is looking for it. Chancery suits were mentioned. They're not called that in every state. It's just basically a civil lawsuit. And in the case of estates, they were usually a friendly lawsuit. They had to have court direction on how to divide slaves or the money. There was some problem that they couldn't settle the issue among themselves. And they are so wonderful. A lot of these are now digitized and online at the Library of Virginia. If you're working outside Virginia, I'm sorry. You'd be very spoiled if you had Virginia, because our state library is by far the best in the nation. And I mean that. I've used many of them. But the chancery suit will go into great detail sometimes. Why they're having the suit, who's related to who and how, and who they're all descended from, who married who's already dead, who's the grandchildren. And these are things you may not find any other document. And a lot of these are still at the county level. Most of them are. I don't know if many states are digitizing these, but a lot of them are. I know Missouri has in some cases. But that's something a lot of people don't think to look for. You can almost smell when one's coming, when there's just something's going to be wrong with this estate. But always check to see if there is one. Or there may be some other suit you hadn't even thought of that they were named in, but some other estate, and they just happen to be related. You didn't even know how they were going to be related. So those are the main things. That, of course, marriages. And then if you still have any time left after that, you can start using tax records. That's very time consuming. But they'll tell you, they answer lots of little questions and will raise a lot of new ones. I generally start with the land tax records because I match them with the deeds, and that helps me get that firmed up, as Michael knows, we did with your Jackson people. And then we go to the personal property tax list. That will tax anybody who breathed. Not everybody had land. And you can get a sense of someone's wealth from the number of horses and cows and slaves that they had or didn't have. And when they first go on that list as a new person, you're pretty well sure they're 16 years old that year or nearly that time. And when they go off that list, they're either dead or they're moved, one or the other. And if you can't find a death record, it means they probably moved, which we learned with your people. So if you got time to do all those basic things, then you can get into all the fun stuff that Barbara talked about, like postal records. I hadn't heard of that before. You always learn something at these things. So that's my basic general talk about how to behave and how to use the system. I'm glad you brought that up. She was saying that she found some death records in court order books in Kentucky. That's true, too. Court order books. I'm glad you mentioned those. Don't forget those either. They can be kind of dull sometimes, just somebody suing somebody, and it just cases continued. But that's where they will also enter in. Anytime someone's recording a deed, it also gets noted in the order book. Same with the will, and we'll tell you who the administrator bond is usually in there, too. That's let's say Jenny died and I was appointed her administrator. You'd have to be my security, so if I messed up, you had to pay for my mistake. But those are things that are always in the court order book. And sometimes I found a great one in Lancaster County. This is in 1782 or 83. The first year they had land and personal tax was 1782. I think it was that year. This man named Robinson died. And the clerk must not have liked this guy. As he wrote in the order book, Epaphroditus Robinson is excused from paying taxes due to the fact he's dead. Then it said he was a ineffective, useless human being. It just slammed him. Obviously, you don't. Why would they record something that you don't have to pay taxes because you're dead, and then go on to say that? You're talking about how the indexing is. Indexing can be quite creative. In this case, she said the name of the deceased was not in the index. The name of the administrator was. There's another county in Virginia that I also shall not name, that title companies will not. A lot of them will not insure a title in that county, because the recent spate of clerks has been so ridiculous in how they've indexed things. You can't find it. Let's say it's the deed for the Paper Company of America. Well, it's filed under paper, index under paper, or under C for company. I mean, they just can't figure out where anything is the records are. And recently they got another new clerk, and now of course they are on the computer age, and now they usually just digitize the documents. They don't keep the paper ones. And they get a computer number. Let's say the first document for the year of 2009 would be 2009-0001. Well, they just filed it as number 1. So what's going to happen next year? Or what year was that? So yes, you have to be very creative when you're using indexes. That reminds me too, these indexes aren't always accurate, just like nothing in life is always accurate. If you can't find what you're looking for, but you're pretty sure it's there, like a will or a deed, the actual, and you know what kind of time frame you're looking for, the deed book itself and the will books themselves usually are their own index, usually at the front of the book. And you hope they aren't halfway ripped off for the name you want. But sometimes I have found a lot of them records that are in the will book and are in that book's index, they're just not in the master index. So that's something you always need to remember. And just a second. In Lancaster County, the master index really only, it says 1653 to 1964. But it isn't. It doesn't start till 1750. And if you just didn't happen to know that, you would think, oh, well, there's no deed for it. But the individual books before that are indexed inside the front cover. But not always by the grantee and grantor, sometimes just only the grantor. But usually those old books have already been thankfully abstracted by somebody. She was saying what other types of information can be found in order books, and those would include getting a license to run an ordinary, which is an inn or a tavern, an ordinary license, military promotions or appointments, constables, sheriffs, juries, and then of course the people and the date of the event.
Well, the date you have to travel back several pages.
That's true. That's another thing with order books is it's let's say the court met on July 18th of this year, and that 20 more pages later is where you end up from the index. We have to go all the way back to find out what date that took place, because they don't write on the top of each page. But just little tricks you need to keep in mind, and so easy to forget to do.
Sometimes that's the only way to do research, is to read it all.
And Betty was also saying that the Madison County order books, only the first one is indexed. The rest of them you just have to go page by tortuous page through it. Well, prior to 1852, the question was what types of ways are there to find marriage records? So we're going to talk about marriages for a second. Prior to 1852, people were married by a marriage bond, similar to a license, but it was a bond. Let's say Jenny and I are going to get married, and you're the bond to it because, it's, let's say, for some legal reason we couldn't.
Your cousins.
Yeah. Then there's but that never stopped anybody. Now, just because there's a bond doesn't mean the marriage took place. Keep that in mind. It doesn't always. Sometimes you've heard the runaway bride. That happens, or just for whatever reason it didn't happen. But usually it did. The bonds are real pieces of paper with real signatures, and a lot of the counties still have their original bonds. That's what you really want to get every time that's possible if we're working before 1852. If not, they might be on microfilm, because that will have the original signatures, and that's what and it will be the real thing, not somebody's idea of it. A lot of times that information is written in abbreviated form into a marriage register. But always ask to get that real bond if it can be found. In Culpeper, they're all in little bitty packs of envelopes by year, and they won't let you go through those by yourself, and they shouldn't.
No, they shouldn't.
But they'll be there with you. I mean, you can watch them until you get to the... Yes. And well, actually, it's 1848 to 1852. They repealed the bond law. They didn't replace it until 1852. So there's a kind of a gap of 4 years, or maybe it's 1850, 1852. A gap of time where there was nothing required to get married. But they usually somehow kept some sort of mention. Let me get to after 1852. Well, go ahead.
You can also find permission slips with those bonds.
That's true. Yes, with the bonds, if there was a minor involved, they would have to have permission or consent from their guardian or parent, and that will be in there too, or should be. Should be in there. That would tell you they're under 21, at least in Virginia. Now, then they replaced the law with what we're more familiar with today, the license, the regular license, which is pretty much the same thing. You got a license, and the minister. Oh, that reminds me. Minister returns. In addition to the bond, the minister had to return to the court the list of marriages for that year. Even this was during the time before 1852. And then same thing after that. The marriage licenses required a lot more information and gave you a lot more detail. Age, occupation, place of birth of both parties, names of their parents. So once you get forward in time, you start to get more and more information out of these records. You had a question.
Yeah, can you tell me what years are available for the bonds in Culpeper?
They don't start until 1781. For the reason I was told, this was on the Germanna Conference. What year did the marriage bonds start in Culpeper? The answer is 1781. Before that time, they're just gone. The reason why they're gone, somebody gave a very good explanation of that. It was a long time ago on the Germanna Colonies mailing list. He had found a Revolutionary War pension file in Kentucky, and when asked for his proof of his marriage, his answer was, a group of us were cold one night at the courthouse and burned them. Used it for Kent to start a fire. So they're just gone. Gone, gone. Nobody, they don't exist. So the only way to prove marriages prior to that is that hopefully they got married in another county, or some other document will prove it for you. Orange County, I haven't done a whole lot of work in Orange County. Their bonds go back to 1730s, I believe. They've been abstracted and published. There's an Orange County marriage book.
They have a marriage book and.
He asked about
marriage
Orange
bond.
County.
In Orange County, there's two different places that the marriage. is
Teresa
recorded.
Fisher did the book.
That's right. Teresa Fisher did do that book. What did you just say?
In
Ye-
Orange County, the marriages, there's, in the courthouse, there's the marriage book where it's recorded and the marriage bond book. So there's two places to look for each marriage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we were just told that Orange County has two different books for marriage. Is this covering the same time frame?
Yes.
Marriage bonds and then the marriage return?
Mm-hmm.
The minister's return? What's the difference?
Or no, the marriage book where they recorded all the marriages, and then they also have the marriage bond books.
They have a marriage bonds book, and then they recorded all the marriages actually married. They got married. There are two different books.
Yes.
Like we said at the beginning, every county is going to have some different way of doing things. So make sure you understand the records. And when you first get there, if you don't know, ask one of the clerks to just kind of guide you around like the man in the back said. Yes, ma'am.
These would all be found in the county courthouse?
These would be in the county courthouse. Unless they've been given, the question was, would all these records always be in the courthouse? No. No, a lot of them have been given, in Virginia anyway, to the Library of Virginia, who have had them microfilmed and then have put them in storage. Because the county court's office don't always have the room for it. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. Like I said, every courthouse is going to be different.
And all of Virginia is online
None of the microfilm county records for Virginia are online, except the chancery suits that we were talking about earlier. And not all of those are done. Some of those are only on microfilm. Most of them are being digitized even as we speak. And some counties just won't give them up to the state. They just refuse. Essex County won't let them have them. So, and they can do that, which is a shame, because Essex County is one we always end up working in, isn't it? That's where they all started off. The question, I think, as I understand it, was how far back do land records go? And that they go back as far, hopefully, to the patent itself, the original patent, or grant, as the case may be, whether it was Northern Neck proprietary or whether it was Crown grant. Crown. Oh, Michael, I knew you were going to get me into this. What's the difference between a patent and a grant? Very little, except who owned the land to begin with. The patents of our Crown grants issued by the king, through the king, basically from the king through his agent, and Virginia agent, the Virginia colony. The process for getting one of those was pretty much the same as in the Northern Neck proprietary. What's the Northern Neck proprietary? Let's getting back to where we were. The Northern Neck proprietary was a private company, basically. It ended up being owned by Lord Fairfax. His agent was Robert King Carter for a good hunk of time. That was all the land north of the Rapidan River, basically, to sum it up, as it finally got settled out, all the way to the rest of Virginia. They were called grants, Northern Neck grants, or Crown patent. The process was pretty much the same. You took out a warrant for survey, you got it surveyed, you turned it back in, paid all your fees along the way, and then they would issue you your patent or your grant. This is getting a little complicated.
Why would they issue that to you just because you got a survey?
Well, I got a warrant for the survey.
How do you get a warrant?
You ask for it. You go to court and get one.
Why would they give it to you?
Because you paid the fees. Because they had a smart attorney helping them. I've been working with Suzanne Madison Collins on an article. I forgot where it's going with this. It has something to do with that topic.
Fees?
Oh, a theory that it seems pretty evident that Jacob Holtzclaw was kind of the leader of that first colony group. Probably could speak English since he'd been a school teacher in Germany and could speak Latin. He probably could do enough English to get around. But we have a theory that the fine magic hand guiding him along many of his ventures was none other than Robert King Carter. If you'll notice, that Germantown tract is all bordered by land that became Carter's. It's just a theory we're cooking up. It just seems that Jacob Holtzclaw knew an awful lot about the details of the law than for a German immigrant to know by himself. That's just an aside.
You know,
They always use the word deed. A deed is after I already own the land. Then it's a deed from me to you. When I got it from the state, the government, it was a patent or a grant. Even after the Revolutionary War, they had the U.S. Land Office, which is still in business, open land out to the west. You've got a grant. I don't know what they ended up. Let's just make it simple. Let's say John Kilby gets 400-acre grant. Well, actually, it was a Northern Neck grant for 400 acres in Culpeper County. He had it surveyed. And if it's a Northern Neck grant, you're in a lot of luck, because those are all on microfilm at the Library of Virginia, and they include the warrant and the survey if they exist.
The land patents are online.
They're both, all of these are online. Well, no, the actual final grant is online, but not the warrants and surveys. That's only on microfilm. But okay, he gets his 400 acres. He dies. He left a will. Left equal amount to each of his sons. So now that's what's to be divided by themselves, I guess. And as they sell it off, there's different description of what their section was. So that's how it gets divided up. It doesn't have to be divided up. Then there were special cases like the, what's that called in Orange County? The Octagonia grant. These were kind of like Beverly. Octonia? This was like a huge grant to Robert Beverly. And then he owned it then, and then he would sell off lots as he saw fit. But those were almost like private records, and I don't know if all the deeds to those were ever recorded. And there's other similar ones like that. Another big one in Augusta County, Beverly again. So there are Beverly Manor. Yeah, these were the manor tracts, and that's more what you were, I think, alluding to. But we're going to just deal with our own humble selves today. A lot of times, speaking of surveys, the county surveyor would record those in his survey book, and those are usually at the courthouse. So, and those are always good to find if you can. Yes, ma'am, in the back?
There's a book called the Octonia Grant, reconstructed by J. Randolph Grimes, 1977.
There's a book about the Octonia Grant by Randolph Grimes.
That's the one.
That's for Orange County, if anyone's interested. There was another question somewhere.
I was going
Betty?
to say, when you were talking about fees, would you address the meaning of quit rents?
A quit rent was basically a tax on your land that you paid every year, and in the Northern Neck, their agent would collect it, and then it's Northern Grant proprietary. It was a crown patent. It would go to the king or the treasury. They weren't very much, like one peppercorn on the Feast of St. Michaelmas, or 5 shillings a year. But they did get collected, and they were due. 10 minutes. There were conditions to some of these earlier crown patents. You had to seat the land. That means settle on it within 3 years. Don't quote me on all these details. And you had to pay so much per acre. At a certain point, they stopped using headright systems. We're not going to get into those today. We're talking about courthouses. But there could be conditions of the land that had to be met before you could get that final clear title to it. And if you didn't do that, it would go back to the Crown, and they could reissue it to someone else.
What do you remember what the seating requirements were?
You had to seat 50 acres of it within 3 years, I believe. It's explained in each patent will tell you.
And build a house that was 10 by 10 or something like
I don't know if it was that detailed. About what the requirements were for seeding the ground. No, tax records only start in 1782. Before that is quit rent records. And tithe list records. Tithes were church records. Are they available? Very scattered instances. They have a book on which counties and what years are available. Some are, some aren't, some are just very spotty, and the ones I've tried to use are just tough. But tithe was a head tax taxed on the head of a household for each male person in his household over age 16, and any servants. Of the white servants taxed, regardless of sex, by age, I think over 14 for children, and slaves, of course, were taxed, male and female. Yes, sir.